welcome to our last Montessori Europe webinar of the year. It has been pleasure sharing our Montessori ideas with our followers and friends across Europe and also beyond. I welcome you all, be it from Canada, Seychelles, South Africa, Cyprus, and lots of Eastern European countries, which I cannot identify precisely, but I see Eastern European names. So welcome. It's lovely to see you again. And for the last webinar, we have thought that we'll share with you some of our ideas and thoughts about play and Montessori. It is set out to provoke some of your ideas, and we hope that will tickle your memory throughout the summer holidays as you think about what you might be doing with the children next year and how you will organize your environments for them next year. Gwendolyn and I will share our PowerPoint with you for about 45 minutes. We will then break into breakout rooms, and we will set you a little question to think about and discuss in the breakout rooms. We will come back about 30 minutes later, and we will share some of the findings or discussions that have been had in the breakout rooms. Those of you who would like to have a certificate of attendance, you will be asked to complete a poll right at the end so that we can prepare the list for the office, and it will be sent to you before Stephanie goes on holiday next week. So hopefully we are all under control and we can begin to explore play and creativity. Gwendolyn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, sorry, I'm trying to multitask because I'm letting people in and I'm trying to do breakout rooms. Many of you know me already. My name is Wendy Bellinger. I am a member of the board at Montessori Europe. I support Barbara with the technical side in these webinars. So I'm usually the one who puts you in breakout sessions. But I am actually also a Montessori teacher and teacher trainer, and my particular interest is play and how that sits within the Montessori pedagogy. So what Barbara and I are talking about tonight is very dear to me, is very important to me. So that's what we're going to explore tonight. How does play sit in the Montessori pedagogy?
And as for me, I have grappled with the idea of play ever since I have done my Montessori training as a 30-year-old mature student. And in our theory lectures, when I asked, what about children's play? I was told we don't talk about children's play in Montessori. Now, things have changed significantly. I know that we have included play, and we have trawled through Montessori's writing to find some references to demonstrate that she did consider play. But we also know that it continues to challenge our colleagues, and that's why the topic of today. We absolutely love this quote from Montessori, which really demonstrates the child's need to play and find ways in play and meaning in play. As I said before, play can be a source of conflict for Montessori practitioners. Some of it is due to the contradictions in Montessori's own writing. Some of it, as I have mentioned just now, is due to some of the Montessori teacher training, which puts so much emphasis on work, but seldom clarifies that the work of the child is to construct the human being. And therefore, in that statement, it doesn't negate play as a way of engagement and way of building child's whole personality and their development. During this year, we have found that play has probably crept into some Montessori settings, or maybe has not crept into Montessori settings, depending on the regulation. But we have also been reminded by our colleague from the Early Years Alliance about the fact that most of the 4-year-olds who are in our settings have now lived half of their lives under the COVID limitations and therefore have not experienced play in its fullness. And there are some children, like my 18-month-old granddaughter, who has not really known life other than under COVID. And we are wondering what is going to happen to all these children and how it will influence their life. We hope that the outdoor play would have managed to do something better and has opened more doors for those children. So let's remind ourselves that in 1946 lectures, Montessori states very clearly that play is the child's work. For tonight's session, we have chosen to look at, use the characteristics of effective learning as the tool which we would like to introduce to you, which is being used in the UK. It is a tool which is designed to help practitioners to understand a little bit more about the nature of children's learning, and particularly the nature of children's learning through play. It is about how children play, how they engage in their activities. And it should help us understand better why play is such an important tool for what we do, what we observe in children's learning. Please, may I have the next slide, Wendelin? The characteristics of effective learning are described in various contexts, and we will go through the familiar stages which we can see in children's play, but they are basically there because we want to help the children to discover, to think, create, problem solve, and through these activities learn how to self-regulate their learning. And in this statement, we really see that we are working very much attuned with Montessori's ideas of the child gradually developing normalized state of being, gradually developing their capacity to concentrate and manage their own learning. Of course, this kind of autonomy doesn't happen out of nowhere. It needs to be supported, and it needs to be supported by knowledgeable adults and also knowledgeable or more able peers, as Vygotsky reminds us. I think that we need to also consider that that play can only happen if we have the time and space and the freedom to follow our own intentions. And I think it is the intentions behind the activities with which children engage in Montessori settings, which are really, really important, because they allow the children to set their own challenges and set their own goals. And it is these discoveries that children make that help them to become curious, creative, resourceful, and resilient learners. Over to you, Wendelin.
Thank you, Barbara. So the characteristics of effective learning is a tool that is more and more increasingly used within English early years settings. And there are 3 strands that are identified in terms of effective learning. And the first strand is when a child is learning actively. And we're going to go into these 3 strands in more depth. But I think the active learning is something that we as Montessorians will feel very comfortable with, and you'll see why when you'll see the next slide where we go into it in a bit more depth. but it's about children concentrating and working, actively with an activity that suits us very well as Montessorians. Most of the materials in our environment are about engaging actively and learning through movement and learning actively. But the next two strands of the characteristics of effective learning, that is where, if for some, it might get a little trickier. How do we feel about letting our children play and explore, about our children investigating, about our children just having a go? How do we feel about our children creating? How do we feel about our children working with the activities in our environments differently, having their own ideas, connecting activities, and developing their own ways of doing things? How do we feel about that? So if we move on this and go into this in a little bit more depth, this is the bit that we feel comfortable with, I would suggest. This active learning. So the child is involved and they want to find out, and they're focused and they pay attention to the detail and they persevere. And we've all seen that child work with the knobbler cylinders, for example. Let's take the red ones. And we've seen the child focus and concentrate, and they're extremely, extremely concentrated about, putting that last cylinder on the very top. And they demonstrate that enjoyment when they finally get that really, really thin, narrow red cylinder to balance on the top. And they're proud, and they enjoy the challenge for their own sake, and they really demonstrate that intrinsic motivation. So I would argue that we feel comfortable with this. I don't know if you want to add anything to this, Barbara, to this particular segment.
I think that it is, and in a way, this picture demonstrates some of the activities that we sometimes even introduce to the children. So they are not the child's own exploration. They are an exploration which is prompted by the adult. And that makes us feel comfortable because we know exactly what the child is getting out of the activity.
Yeah. And we were talking about this morning, weren't we? So, we feel quite excited because we think, oh, look, we're mixing materials, and we're getting quite creative here. We're mixing one set with another, but actually, and it is a good activity, the child is matching. So in that sense, there is something that the child is achieving. But either you've downloaded and printed off a template from the Montessori print shop, nothing wrong with that, but it is not the child's own creative exploration. It's not the child thinking critically. It's the child doing an adult-led activity. So it's active learning, but it's not creative, it's not exploration, and it's not critical thinking. So I love this picture, and I know that the practitioner in whose setting this took place is present in this webinar, and thank you again for letting us use this. I won't mention names, but I absolutely love this, because this is where we start getting into the children's play and exploration. This is where we start seeing curiosity, the children exploring, they're playing with what they know. So they know that the pink tower, you can see the pink tower being built accurately. You can see the geometric solids being matched in terms of their bases. You can see that they are connecting these materials, but they're extending it, they're expanding it, and they are enjoying it in a much more open-ended manner. And they're having a go. They're placing the red rods vertically. I mean, everything is vertical, and you were saying this morning, weren't you, Barbara, about the schema of the vertical schema that's going on. But it's challenging. The work that they're doing is challenging. They're taking risks, they're new experiences. And how comfortable do we feel about letting our children work with the materials in this way. And I always say, when Barbara and I talk about this, I have seen the most elaborate, and some of you who have heard me talk about this will have heard me say this as well. I have seen the most elaborate structures like this be created. And what I then see is the children putting everything away on the shelf perfectly, in the right place, in the right order. So they know how to work with the materials. We don't need to worry about that. But the fact that they have the freedom and the space to explore these materials in their own way, and you know, to take these risks and to have a go, that is what's important. Did you want to add anything to this, Barbara?
The only thing I would like to add is think about what is this picture telling us about the two children working together and creating together. I think that that is really, really important message for us as Montessorians, is to look beyond and look at what we are actually seeing. This is where our observation and knowledge of child development should help us understand the importance of this work stroke play, which we are witnessing.
And then the third strand of the characteristics of effective learning are this the critical creativity, so creating and thinking critically. And this is about the children having their own ideas, thinking of new ways of doing things, making links, you know, connecting things independently rather than what we saw in a few slides ago, which is a very adult-led activity. And making theories and seeing if it works. You know, what happens if I put the broader prism on a narrower prism? Will that still stand? And this all develops their critical thinking skills. And that is what's crucial. And that is what we're going to focus on in the rest of this presentation. That is one of the crucial skills that our children need in the 21st century. You know, the ability to work together flexibly, creatively, and to adapt to the situation. That is what we need from our children. That's what our children need to move forward in the future.
So you may say to yourself, so what are these characteristics have to do with the Montessori's three pillars of the Montessori pedagogy: the child, the environment, and the adult? What they do, they enable us to explain Montessori practice in universal language, but they also encourage us to go back to Montessori's writing and think about her writing in the context of practice today. And whilst children in the 21st century follow similar developmental patterns as they are learning and growing and maturing, they are certainly not the same children that Montessori experienced when she worked with children in the 20th century. And it is for this reason that we need to go back to Montessori's writing and think about it in the context of what we know about children of today.
So I love this quote. And I guess the quotes that we have used throughout the rest of our presentation, we want to give you permission to embrace you know, the idea that children can be or can have more space and freedom and time to be creative and to have their own ideas. And I love this quote where she says, you know, in our schools we allow the children to use their spontaneous activity by offering them objects appropriate to their stage of development, and it's in this way that they learn, by doing. So this, I think, is important to remember as we look at the three pillars of the Montessori pedagogy. And the first, of course, is the child. And this quote is I think something that we must, it's hard. You know, as a practitioner, I know how hard it is, but if the child is allowed to use their spontaneous activity in a tranquil environment without interference or unasked for help, he is indeed engaged in a most important work. he is building the man he will one day be.
And the work can be what we term play, or it should be play should be included as one of these activities which allow the child to construct him or herself, because we now know that without play we are not constructing the whole human being.
So Montessori said that when we speak of the environment, we include all the objects which a child can freely choose and use as he pleases, according to his own needs and tendencies. And a teacher is simply there to assist him at the beginning to get his bearings among all the different things, teaches him the precise use of each of them, but then she leaves him free in the choice and execution of his work. So again, I think that freedom and space to explore the activities in the way that is suitable for their own needs and tendencies, we need to remember that.
And I love the idea of the choice and execution. The child can do it the way they need to do it rather than the way we have demonstrated. This is where Montessori gives us, or gives the child, the license to be playful in her thoughts, to be creative, to be problem solving. All of this is extremely important for the development of the whole child.
And finally, the adult. And she writes that we must offer the material to him following a certain technique. But then she goes on in the same chapter that the teacher begins to see that the children do things that cause her surprise, that are far beyond what she imagines, perhaps in a different fashion than expected. I love that. That is what you want. You want the children to extend the use of the materials. You want them to be creative. You want them to explore. And so, as Barbara said, the children are given the license. The children are given the freedom by Montessori to work with the materials in the way that they need, that their development needs. And as we've been discussing in a number of presentations that we've been doing recently, Barbara and I, we can never know what it is that the child, we can never fully know what it is that the child needs at any given time. So we need to observe them as they interact with the materials and the environment, because that is the only way we're going to find out.
And it is, of course, we as adults need to know how to use the materials, not to be dogmatic about the way how children use them, but for us to really understand the value and what they give and their potential of what they give to the children. I think those we often confuse the training that we give to adults with working with children. It is because we ourselves are quite dogmatic in the training that we give and don't give the students the license to explore and find ways, which then results in the students sharing exactly the same idea with the children. So for me personally, having spent 35 years teaching and training adults, for me, coming closer to the nature of the child in the way how we work with students is still a very important and very challenging way of how to prepare Montessori teachers for the classroom.
So putting Montessori's writing into a more modern context, those of you who joined us, I think it was last month. Was it last month that Lynette joined us?
Yeah.
So Lynette Brock works with John Siraj Blatchford, and they write, and I'm going to read it so that we all have time to process this quote, that in the Montessori context, highly structured activities and materials are presented to children as focused tasks to give them sensory and other foundational curriculum experiences that they may subsequently draw upon in their learning. Each child should be allowed a 3-hour work cycle of uninterrupted engagement in their own choice of activities and in their free use of materials to encourage the repetition of activities, as well as to provide the opportunity for them to apply and adapt their newly acquired operational processes in new contexts and in meaningful ways, providing opportunities for them to try out their most recently acquired skills and competences as if celebrating what they know.
I just love this quote because it reminds us that um, academics who truly understand Montessori can value what the environment gives children and can express it in a way that really celebrates children from the Montessori perspective. So,
So that is that would be sort of engaging with play step one, but I'm quite keen to take it a step further, and I would like to refer to I guess I'm getting older, but I would like to say recent research, but it really isn't. It's research that dates back to the start of the new millennium, 2002, by Marlene Barron, who conducted research at the Westside Montessori School, which showed that when we allow the children to figure out how to use the material before presenting them our alternative way, we're actually supporting the development of problem solving and risk taking and critical thinking skills. So what was done there is that the children were with materials that were safe, and the article, and we have a reference list at the end of this presentation, but I mean the article is very clear that it's not with practical life activities where the children are using knives, for example. With activities that are safe, the children were allowed to figure out how to use these materials before an adult then joined and showed them an alternative, not the way, but an alternative way to use the material. Because as Barron says, if we insist that children can only use a material after they've been presented a lesson, we continue to promote the hierarchical educational process that we're trying to move away from. We're perpetuating this lack of independence that exists in traditional education, where it's top-down, adult-led, and we're not supporting the development of independence, of problem solving, of critical thinking skills. And Barron's research is actually supported by slightly more recent research by an assistant professor at MIT, who knows, this is 2013, so she might well be a professor by now, Laura Schultz at MIT. She had a toy which a researcher would be with the child, and in situations where the researcher showed the child, hey, if you push here, the toy squeaks, it was very unlikely that the child would discover any of the other features that the child had. Whereas the children who were just given the toy and they were told, hey, have fun, they figured out all the different things that the toy could do. And Schultz says that there's a trade-off between instruction versus exploration. And the more I instruct you, the less you will explore, because particularly as a child, you will assume that if other things are true, you would have shown me. So I think that's really important to remember in our Montessori settings, where we insist that a child can only use a piece of material after it's been presented to them.
and from my perspective, it is also creating a hierarchy in the classroom, putting the teacher above the child in saying, I know what to do and you need to do what I have done. It totally devalues all the gifts and the capacities to think for him or herself that the child brings into the environment with them. Because often the children will tell you what they know if they first explore the materials. And so sometimes it is not necessary to teach the names of the colors. If the children name colors as they explore the color tablets, or it is not necessary to um, present how to build the pink tower if the child after exploration puts it back into on the shelf in exactly the way how it was there when they took it off the shelf. So I think that this is really, really important element of valuing what the child brings with them into the setting. They are not an empty vessel.
No, absolutely. And so I hope that we're giving you some nuggets to think about how important play is. Alison Gopnik, of course, is a real supporter of the value of play. And in her book, The Gardener and the Carpenter, she shares research which demonstrates that imaginative play supports the development of thinking counterfactually, which means that it allows us to think of other ways something can be. And my goodness, we've had to rely on that over the past year. You know, we have had to come up pretty quickly with solutions to suddenly being at home, working from home, learning from home, shopping from home. Everything suddenly had to be done from home. And so we had to think up a whole new way of existing. And imaginative play supports this type of thinking. So we cannot deny our children this right. We cannot deny our children the opportunity to develop these skills because they are vitally important to their future. So I think we want to end with just two more quotes that give you permission, that we're in which Montessori gives you and the children permission to go out and play, to be brave. The wise mother will remember that playtime is never wasted. So long as the children are busily absorbed, they are working at their own development. A child's liberty, and I think this is what's important as well, because I saw a question, I'm trying to multitask, and I'm sorry that we haven't answered the questions in the chat, but it's a bit difficult to manage everything. But a child's liberty should have as its limits the interests of the group to which he belongs. But everything else, every act that can be useful in any way, whatever, may be expressed. It should not only be permitted, but it should also be observed by the teacher. This is essential.
Because from the observation, we will get to know the children so much better if we are willing to see beyond what we expect.
So that is our presentation, and there are a few people that I haven't put in breakouts yet, but I will finish doing that just shortly. In your breakout groups, we are inviting you to discuss what prevents us from being brave. So that is what we invite you to take away, and you will receive this presentation as a PDF tomorrow, so you will have access to these references that we've shared in our presentation.
Before you put us into breakout rooms, just in case you haven't seen it, Margaret has mentioned a TED talk by Sugata Mitra about children's capacity to teach themselves from a computer screen built into a wall. If you haven't seen it, we very strongly recommend. It is a very inspirational talk. It has got some of its limitations because it just focuses on the value of knowledge, but definitely inspirational enough to spend the time to watch it and consider what he has to say and the capacity of children to learn. What a fantastic conversation we have had. A fabulous webinar to finish on. Webinars. In our room, we had fundamentally Montessori teacher trainers. So we have explored a little bit the role of teacher training in discussions about what work and play is. But we have also had gone back to the original question, do we dare to be brave? And if we really, the observation was made that if we really dared to be brave, we are really challenging all the use of all the materials in the classroom. We are really suggesting a Montessori revolution for the 21st century. We have considered this, that really understanding what the materials give the children and trying to create others for the classroom. This would facilitate access to many children around the world, because at the moment the access is limited by lack of finances to set up the traditional Montessori classrooms. So there was quite a strong political agenda behind this challenge, which I think would be definitely worthwhile exploring by organizations promoting Montessori education around the world. But I would love to thank my colleagues for a really, really meaningful and challenging conversation. And it was a joy to share it with you. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything from our group. Okay, we can go to the next group. Michelle and
Marion.
Michelle and Marion.
Okay, it was my job to take notes, and I tried my best that I could. We had a really interesting conversation, and I think one of the points that it became the most interesting was when Lucy brought up about the fact that we often, when we're talking about exploration and how we use the materials and being brave, we always focus on the sensorial materials and the exploration with those, whereas actually, you know, it's across the whole curriculum and how even tools are used outside. So, you know, if we explore with sensorial materials, what do we do with practical life or activities for everyday living when we're teaching particular skill bases using particular tools and that sort of thing. So we had quite a long conversation really about that exploration. And then we had another one about being brave around the challenges of supporting children with developing needs and things, and how their need for exploration is more. We had that discussion about the 21st century child and how their needs are changing because they're coming in with different skills, mainly on screens and not so much on creative thinking and learning. So very similar really, and very much the same. Had a little bit of conversation about the terminology, the use of terminology, and a little bit of conversation between work and play as well, and very interesting. So we had towards the end started talking about different curricula in different countries as well, and the fact that I think it was Lucy's from the Seychelles. Did I get that right, Lucy? Yeah. And that they're going away from play-based into a more formal early years curriculum, whereas, you know, it's being perceived at the moment in the UK, we're coming back to a more play-based curriculum. So yeah, lots of interesting points and food for thought.
Marion, would you like to add anything? Or
No, I think Michelle's put it very succinctly there. And I think we were all in agreement that, you know, there are different definitions of work and play, and having methodology, of Montessori methodology within the nursery setting of respect and boundaries, you know, freedom with boundaries was an important part to consider and include as well. So yeah,
and lots of acknowledgement from everybody about undressing our own perceptions and our own learning from when we did our own training, and
yeah,
which everyone here, I'm sure, is doing the same journey. So
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Interesting.
Suzanne and Wendy?
We also had, actually, Michelle, it sounded like you were in our room for a moment when you were giving your feedback, because we had quite similar discussions. We had quite a sort of bridge in our rooms, from the 30-year seasoned Montessorian to the person who's just coming into Montessori. So that was quite interesting. We had similar discussions to what Michelle's room had. We also had the sort of question, you know, can we allow the same kind of creative expression with the numeracy or literacy materials that we can with sensorial and AEL? We also looked at the fact that the training does stop a lot of us from, you know, potentially doing things, although, you know, seeing children engage differently with the materials. We had a beautiful example of children outside in the garden who wanted to measure some paving slabs, who then went rushing off inside, got the number rods and then measured the paving slabs, the distances between the slabs, you know, and used that information to figure out how they were going to continue building that path. And then beautifully taking the materials back into the classroom. So really showing that if they're allowed to, they can use the information that or the skill set that they've previously gained to further their learning. And we also sort of then spoke about, you know, the boredom, that sometimes the older children are just bored in the environment when they're not allowed to extend their learning with the materials. We also questioned the language that we use in presentations, you know, whether we allow the child to work with something first and then show them our version, or the other way around. But sometimes the language that is used will either encourage the child to do something further or prohibit the child from doing so. And I think the last thing that I can think of, Wendy, please add if I've left out something, was that in the UK, you very often have 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in one classroom, and that their needs are very different. So you don't have a defined toddler group and then 3 to 6 group. And one of our participants said that the bravest thing that they would imagine is that to put the 2-year-old into the same space and then to navigate, you know, how you integrate the 2-year-old with those materials, that they're not taking the golden beads off and doing whatever it is that they're wanting to do with them, but to create a different space for them. So yeah, it was lovely. It was really, really lovely today. Thank you.
Yes, that was the funny thing that I was just going to say. Being in the UK, we're so envious of Cyprus and South Africa, because you have the groups 3 to 6 and we lose ours so soon after they're 4, and it's such a tragedy for us in the UK. But thank you everybody for their contributions, because I thought it was a lively discussion. Thanks, Suzanne.
I think it's an interesting expression of bravery to put the 2, 3 and 4-year-olds together. But again, if you observe and if you are able to navigate it skillfully, what the 2-year-olds get and what the 4-year-olds get from that family arrangement is really much to be valued, and it gives children riches that we cannot really imagine it will give them. I think as we are finishing our conversation for today, I wonder if Wendelin would like to say anything in conclusion.
Well, I'm just, thank you, Barbara, and thank you everyone, and for sharing your reflections. And I'm sad that I wasn't in your rooms today. I'm always sad that I'm not in your rooms, but today especially, I would have loved to hear your conversations. I love the idea of the bravery extending beyond the sensorial materials and possibly the AEL or the practical life materials. And dare we be brave with the numeracy and literacy materials, and in what way would we be brave with those materials? And I think, as many of you have pointed out, and as Barbara has pointed out, dare we be brave in our teacher training? and what kind of message can we share there. And I love this idea, Suzanne, also that you were sharing about the language, how encouraging it can be, but also how prohibitive it can be. And it makes me, it's certainly something that we will take note of at Montessori Europe as we as we plan future events, because I think that it's a really important notion of how we as teachers in the classroom, in the environment, whether that's in a, you know, at home, in a setting, wherever, how we use our language, because it's everything for the child's development. But I hope that you will leave today feeling a little bit braver, and I hope that you know, that some of the writing that we have unearthed for you, Montessori's writing that we've unearthed for you, will make you feel that you have Montessori's permission to be braver, and to give the children the space and the freedom to explore, because that's what they need. That is what they need.
I think for children, both work and play are important. The very young children often come to nursery to want to do work. They take it very seriously, and it is their jobs for the day that they love. But I would like Hannah to finish with the voice of the child. What did you consider to be biggest compliment recently when a child said to you?
A child said to me, "Hannah, you are so silly." And I took that as a great compliment. And we currently have a student in our setting, and one of my goals for her for next week was to enjoy being playful with the children. So hopefully that will have a positive impact. Thanks, Barbara.
I think we all need to give ourselves permission to be a little bit more silly with the children. Please do a poll if you want to have a certificate, and join us next September for the Technology Summit, which will address some of the needs of the children of the 21st century and challenges to our practice that we have to grapple with. It's the last Saturday of September. We look forward to seeing you then, and enjoy your holiday. Much deserved. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.